Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a Woody fight when I put Woody Allen's Annie Hall against Woody Allen's Deconstructing Harry. And, this one was an interesting one to get through, because, love him or hate him, Woody Allen is one of the greatest writers of all time for comedy. And he does, maybe on an average, 1 out of 3 movies are great. And let's just dive right into one of the greatest, Annie Hall. Is the one, it swept the Oscars in 77. It took home Best Picture and Best Director, Best Actress, Diane Keaton. And, it's just, the film itself is probably like the best, most honest representation of like who Woody Allen is, what his mind looks like and shit. And Woody Allen is notorious for like ripping off, foreign directors like Fellini or Ingmar Bergman. And, it's, you can kind of see the Fellini inspiration here, especially the way they tell the story. A lot of fourth wall breaking. Sometimes movies that break the fourth wall can be fucking annoying, but the movie opens up with him, just kind of a little monologue type thing, and it introduces the story and what's going on. The whole movie is basically him reflecting on probably the greatest relationship he ever had and how he fucked it up, essentially. And they originally wanted to do like a little screwball comedy, like they did in the 30s, but then they realized, this is way more interesting to just do the mind of Woody Allen. And it really is, plus he plays himself perfectly, it's one thing about it, he's a little whiny, kind of annoying, like, that kind of shit. But when he really gets to rolling, when Woody Allen's like on a real wine roll, like it's like watching Fred Astaire dance. There's just something oddly beautiful about it, And of course, Diane Keaton is a knockout. She gives a phenomenal performance. I've never seen like a woman just look so horrified to be in love with a man before, and it's just like she can't really understand why she's in love with Alvy Singer, played by Woody Allen. And, and Woody Allen's character really can't understand it either, and of course, and he tries to sabotage it every chance he gets. There's some great moments in the film, too, like that split screen with the psychoanalyst is like, how often do you have sex? Oh, hardly ever 3 times a week. And she's like, constantly three times a week. It's just a brilliant, not only one of the most honest films about Woody Allen, who he is, it's also one of the most honest films about relationships and all the fucking intricacies of that shit and stuff. But it also, like, the best scene is the fucking movie line shit with the dudes all fucking just pontificating like a motherfucker in his ear, and then Marshall McLuhan schools him. That was originally going to be Fellini, but Fellini didn't want to do it. I can only assume because after Alice in Wonderland, he's like, I don't want to do this shit. Because at that time everybody was in love with Fellini, and as well as especially Woody Allen. It wasn't just Fellini, it was Bergman, and sometimes you go back and forth on who's he going to rip off. But the beautiful thing about Annie Hall is you kind of see a lot of these influences, but it's his own voice. He's telling a story in his voice. He's not trying to be anything else. He's making a wholly original film and shit. And and it's got a lot of great side here. Like Shelley Duvall is phenomenal. She's so wonderful in this. Where his friend sets him up on a date with her. She's a reporter for the Rolling Stone magazine, and just that line, sex with you is a very Kafka-esque experience. It's like, I'm pretty sure he's never heard that before. Probably the best compliment in his life. And oddly, that's the woman he should be with. But he's too much of a fucking dingle head to fucking go with it. And so it just goes back and forth. And very well written, like it's fucking great. It's one of those movies that you can understand why it won Best Picture at the Oscars, because it's just it's one of the greatest romantic comedies of all time, and it's very honest. You also get a young Christopher Walken in here, and being psycho as fuck, and it's just the way he does it, and like breaks the fourth wall so brilliantly. And so we move on to Deconstructing Harry, which is essentially a trashy version of Wild Strawberries, the Ingmar Bergman film. And here we see Woody Allen playing a novelist who is not a very good novelist as far as like originality, because he just takes shit from his life and doesn't even bother to mask it. It's like the thinly veiled is an understatement, and it kind of destroys his life. We see at the beginning Judy Davis, who's a phenomenal actress, one of the best. That woman is a powerhouse of intensity. and ripping him a new one. But my biggest complaint with Deconstructing Harry is like it's made to be so trashy, and there's a lot of, now mind you, I'm not one to say, you know, people shouldn't cuss. As you see in these videos, I let a few slip, probably more than a few, but it sounds like I know how to cuss. Woody Allen doesn't really know how to cuss. He's not really a vulgar kind of guy. You know, technically what you would call a clean comic. You know, sure, he talks a lot about sex, but he does it in a way that's not crass and vulgar like a lot of motherfuckers. But in Deconstructing Harry, he tries so hard to make this movie trashy that he's got people like Judy Davis saying motherfucker. Like, I've never heard somebody so out of place saying that word before. And, you know, even when Woody Allen is like, yeah, but, you know, it's like, it's just not good, you know. And the movie itself is a jumble. Like, honestly, the more interesting parts of the film is when it breaks off into like little segments of what his novels are and stuff, you know. But then again, it's so overtly trashy that it's like, what the fuck are you doing, Woody Allen? If you really run out of material, original shit that you gotta like, you know, I guess that is what they say. The vulgarians are the ones that can't articulate themselves and shit. And whatever it's meant to be, I don't fucking know. But like I said, it's a whole Wild Strawberries thing. He's going to get an award at a college, and he picks up a ragtag bunch of fucking misfits. The film's stacked with a cast. You know, honestly, the cast alone beats Annie Hall, but content-wise, it's fucking garbage. I mean, there's a lot, like I said, a lot of great moments. Like the prostitute scenes, like, honey, I'll give you another blowjob for free. Sounds like you need it. That medicine ain't working. You know, that's fucking hilarious. But you also got to sit through just a lot of fucking bullshit. And it's like, it's honestly just Woody Allen just being shocking for the sake of being shocking. But a lot of people, but still at this time, people were just, you know, on his dick because of Annie Hall probably, you know. And so it's clearly got to go to Annie Hall this round, because that's just a, I don't know if I'd call it a perfect movie, but for the subject matter and what it's trying to do, it's perfect. You know, you got an artist who had fully found his voice and created, you know, one of his more personal movies. And of course, following that up with Manhattan, you know, like, that's fucking brilliant. You know, it's like, there's a rule of thumb. 1 out of 3 are great. Sometimes it breaks the rule. But more often than not, especially later in his career, when you get, by the time you get to Deconstructing Harry, it was the point where, you know, he really shouldn't be in his movies anymore. Because at that time, his best movies were the ones that he wasn't in, the ones that he just wrote and directed. But it's all, I don't know, it's just one of those things where it's like, that whole thing is like, writer-directors tend to get worse in their career. Maybe they ran out of material. I mean, the dude does a movie a year. So, I mean, you're bound to run out of shit. So, for anybody keeping score, that's 34-30. 70s are up by 4. They're coming back. You know, the 90s were looking like they were coming back, but the 70s are rising back up again. You know, that gap is steadily getting bigger, you know, and it's just shit like this. So it's like the 70s had classics like Annie Hall. Like, you really can't beat that shit, especially when your auteur, you know, just decides to be vulgar for the sake of being vulgar, you know. And like I said, a great fucking cast, a bevy of good-looking women. You know, the biggest illusion of any Woody Allen film is like, these gorgeous women want to sleep with this dude, you know. And he can make that believe it. He gets actresses that are that good to believe. And Diane Keaton was the best one. Like, nobody can top Diane Keaton. Maybe some of the other ones in the later films, like Judy Davis and fucking Elizabeth Shue, but they're not given a script as good as what Diane Keaton got. Diane Keaton got the best Woody Allen scripts, with the exception of maybe Mia Farrow. But I don't know. All I know is 70s are up by 4, 34-30 is the score. And if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I don't give a fuck, you know, any, you know, recommendations, collaborations. I'm all for it. Whatever the fuck, this is all building towards something. What it is, I don't know, but you'll see more and more of these bonus rounds pop up, because I got to know. I got 5 pages at least. This motherfucker could be going to 6. I don't know. I keep fucking finding these matchups, and if y'all send me any, I'll bump them up to the top and all that good shit. So, like I said, you know, it's one of those things. You don't never know until you know.